organization that was sponsoring a book I had translated. But the reason why I'm telling you this is, again, to emphasize the fact that dialogue and meetings and conferences like this are vital, because every time I go, and this is the 5th time I've been in Iran since the revolution, my father refuses to speak to me. He thinks I'm going to my death. And I'm not kidding. My son's friends, my son owns a business in Brooklyn, he's 24 years old. When he tells his friends that I'm going to Iran, they say in a very sarcastic way, an American Jew going to Iran? How does he come back? It's impossible. They're going to eat you. So what I'm saying here, and what I would like to say here, is what I say to them if I have time. To show that the relationship between Islam and Judaism is a very, very strong relationship, and historically attested to. And I try to point out to them in any way I can that the fears that they have are based on ignorance. It's not that they're willfully ignorant, it's just that they're unfamiliar. And they have imbibed the kind of poisons that we see on Fox News, CNN, I will add that also. Many of you may have seen recently when Dr. Khatami came to the United States. In the crawl on CNN, it said leader of axis of evil. And they weren't kidding. It is this kind of unconscious poison that my father, who's an enlightened gentleman, and my son's friends, who are also enlightened, imbibe every day without knowing it. So, here is what I tell them. Islam and Judaism share 3 things: a conception of God, a conception of humanity, and a conception of time. What could be more basic than that? First, conception of God. Baruch atoi Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, which means, praise be to God, the creator of the universe. This is that same Rabbul Alameen, which exists in Arabic, Persian, everywhere else Islamic culture exists. It exists in Hebrew. Melech Haolam is king of the universe, master, Padashah Jahaniyan. This is the exact translation. When you begin with these words, your conception of God as the creator and the one who breathes spirit, who creates life, and creates a division between lightness and darkness. Judaism and Islam share these concepts exactly. In fact, the word for light in Arabic, Noor, is the Hebrew word nar. And some of you may have seen in synagogues a candelabra called a menorah. This means place of light. It's exactly Hebrew and Arabic. And we don't get into discussion Abraham Geiger in the last century tried to get into and say, Hebrew had it first, therefore the Arabs borrowed it. No, they had it simultaneously, and that can be proved today linguistically. They shared this linguistic tradition. It has nothing to do with who got it first. They don't play those games anymore in academia. This is an old conception. Okay, now we get to man, the creation. What is the word for man in Hebrew? Well, it may not surprise you that the word for man in Hebrew is Adam. See any similarities? Adam, Adam. And the word for dust in Hebrew is Adama. So man is made from dust. And how does he achieve life? Breath, hayat, 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 hayat is breathed into him. Some of you may have seen this big hotel chain called Hyatt Hotels. That is the word for life. Because it is the breath of God that is breathed into humanity, that is breathed into soulless earth and becomes a living, breathing spirit. Don't tell me that the 2 traditions don't share this from way back. Also contained within the word Adama and Adam is the word dam, which in Arabic means blood. Dam halal. His blood is sheddable. That is also Hebrew. So both the people who used the language that we now know as Hebrew, Proto-Semitic, and the people that use the language that we now know as Arabic, and the people who use the language that we now know as Syriac, all enjoyed these words and could make puns using these words. And they often, being people who like to joke around, would say, Adam, Adama, Dam, and they would laugh. Isn't that a coincidence? It's not a coincidence. These are linguistic tokens of a shared culture. And this is something that you must emphasize to people in times, as our distinguished host said, when we are using culture to separate people. We are using language to separate people. We must indicate to people, we must teach people that it is language that brings us together, not in the traditional myth, where it's exactly the opposite of the traditional story of the Tower of Babel. When you point out these things, it is, you say, people suddenly realize, my God, we're using the same language, we don't realize it. And that means that we're using the same concepts and metaphors, which are tokens of that deep commitment to a shared religious heritage that grew up in a place that we call the Middle East. Okay, and finally, the concept of time. Today is the 16th of Elul in the year 5766 in the Hebrew calendar. Now, why do I mention this? I mention this because Islam and Judaism share an insistence that time be lunar. Many of my students ask me, why does Ramadan come in the summer sometimes and then it comes in the winter and then the spring? Well, I tried to show them that the lunar calendar, when juxtaposed to the solar calendar, moves it around. They understand that. The Hebrew calendar is also a lunar calendar. But in order to make the high holy days, which are coming up, today is a holiday. I wish you all congratulations for the holiday that we are celebrating today, the birthday of the Imam. But pretty soon, Jewish people will have one of their most important holidays. In fact, the most important holiday in the Jewish calendar, and that is Rosh Hashanah. And therein lies another common term. Rosh Hashanah is merely Rosh Hashanah, which means the head of the year. But many Jews don't know this, and many Muslims don't know this, so they say, must be two different traditions. Let's beat each other up. Let's fight about it. Let's shed some dam. There's another reason why I'm bringing it up, and this is going to resonate in this audience. Many of you know Persian. You know the word Azar. You know its origin. Azerbaijan. Azarbadagan. The concept of Azar in Zoroastrianism. This is an Iranian concept. Well, the name of the month that the Jews use to keep their lunar calendar fixed, that is, Rosh Hashanah always comes this time of year. It's not because the Jewish calendar is a solar calendar. It is because the Jews insert a month into the year so that they can make Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and these other holidays fall at the same time during the year. The name of that month is Adar, or Ardar in Hebrew, which comes from the Persian word Azar. And again, I'm not saying this just because I'm trying to demonstrate cheap linguistic tricks. I'm trying to show you that the people who use these languages are very conservative, and they maintain their culture and their traditions by insisting on conserving language. New terms are not invented. New concepts are not invented. The Godhead, the conception of God, the conception of the creation of humanity, and the conception of time have remained the same throughout the millennia. Now, the question that we will reserve for the question and answer period, because I'm going to cut it short, because I know my friend Ali Abadi here needs more time. And that is, with all these shared basic conceptions, why are they at each other's throats now? Why has it become, when I travel now, and I've traveled a lot these past couple of years, everywhere I go, with the exception of Iran, I see more anti-Americanism than when I was traveling during the Vietnam War. Why are there these divisions throughout the world? When the traditions, as we will see, as the other distinguished speakers will point out, are so close. Close enough to be called a common tradition. Thank you.
Shalom, Dr. Sproxman. Salam, Dr. Ali Abadi. And peace to all of you. Let me tell you a little bit about our interfaith experience and our dialogue at the Stone Church. The origins of our interfaith exchange came from a memorial service that we had on the Sunday after 9/11. Many of the people in our congregation work in the city during the week and come to Cragsmoor on the weekend. And that week was so horrendous and disruptive, we were not able to contact them even by phone to know if they were alive or not. But they did show up at this memorial service. And we were just filled with joy to see them all once again gathered with us in this church. At the same time, we felt great sorrow for the loss of life. But I asked each of them to share their thoughts with us about what happened in the city that week. And each of them, without any exception, prayed that those events of 9/11 would not contribute to further violence. Well, of course, we all know the rest of the story. The violence escalated beyond our worst nightmares. So the following year, we knew we needed to do something more than have a memorial service. We knew we needed to focus on peace. We needed to envision it. We needed to start working towards it. So we started these interfaith services and dialogues. And we had representatives from every major religion. We shared our core values of our religion with Jews, Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, Hindus, Native Americans, and others. We were looking for what was common, what was the common ground that we shared as people of faith. And each year, the affirmation rang out loud and clear from every direction. All of these faiths rested on a strong foundation of peace and love of one's neighbor. We heard it over and over and over again in the Quran, in the Torah, in the Bible, in the sutras. It was love and peace that formed the common ground on which all spiritual traditions were built. Martin Luther King was very much aware of this. And he mentioned it 2 times very distinctly, one in the speech in which he accepted the Nobel Prize for Peace, and also in his major address that he gave beyond Vietnam. And I would just like to quote to you from Martin Luther King. "This is a great new problem of mankind. We have inherited a big house, a great world house in which we have to live together. Black men and white men, Easterners and Westerners, Gentiles and Jews, Catholics and Protestants, Muslims and Hindus. A family unduly separated in ideas, culture, and interest, who, because we can never again live without each other, must learn somehow in this one big world house to live with each other." And this is our great challenge. This means that more and more our loyalties must become ecumenical rather than sectional. We must now give an overriding loyalty to a worldwide fellowship that lifts neighborly concern above one's tribe, race, class, and speaking a nation is in reality a call for an all-embracing and unconditional love of all men. I'm speaking of that force which is all of the great religions, which all the great religions have and seem as a supreme unifying principle of life. Love is somehow the key that unlocks the door which leads to ultimate reality. So we are fortunate that we have him sort of as a guidepost. He had great vision, and it was not limited just to the civil rights movement in this country. It extended to the whole world. And he recognized the need for a new paradigm. And he is calling upon people of faith to play a crucial role in bringing this about. Just as Dr. Sprackman was pointing out, language is a very powerful tool. Language is being used in incendiary ways to excite and bring people to war and conflict. But language can work in the other way as well, to bring us towards peace. I'd like to mention this wonderful book by Matthew Fox. Matthew Fox is a visionary and an activist, and it's called One River, Many Wells. And he shares the traditions of many different religions in different areas, like their understanding of divinity, of femininity, of peace. And he gives selections from their literature to show how connected they are. I'm realizing that I'm not going to have time to read selections today, but for example, the names that are given to God. He lists the whole 99 names that Muslims chant when they say the names of God, and then compares them to the words that Christians use to honor their God. But in here, he refers to a Benedictine monk who lived for over half a century in India, running an ashram for Christians and Hindus, who said that the time has come to share one another's spiritual riches. If one starts with doctrines, the arguments are endless. But when one comes to the level of interior experience, that is where the meeting takes place. And he gives several examples. One is of the river and the well. Meister Eckhart actually gives this example, that if we think of God as an underground river surging underneath the entire planet, and there are many wells from each of the religions that go down deep and tap into that wellspring of spirit and of faith, it will come to the surface and it will be their own religion with their own unique characteristics, but it comes from the same source. That's where the title comes, One River, Many Wells. And the other example is of the human hand. If we look at our fingers, especially at the tips, out there sort of floating around, they seem quite independent, and we can get them to move quite independently, can't we? But once we start looking deeper, just like when we look down into the well, we find out that they are all attached to the same source. They are all unified. And to make anything really work, they all have to work together. And the strength comes from the hand and eventually from the heart. It comes from the spirit. That's where we need to be looking to find the connections that we have with each other. There's a wonderful occurrence occurring with the calendar here, with Ramadan and with the high holidays occurring at the same time in October. And there's also a Christian holiday that is in concurrence with this, and that is the feast of St. Francis of Assisi. The Catholic Church, for the past 35 years, I wish I could say it was for 2 centuries that this was true, but I can only tell you that for the past 35 years, the Catholic Church has been very involved with interfaith discussions with other religions. It started with Vatican II, but one of the most significant gatherings took place at Assisi when Pope John Paul II called together religious people from all over the world to this little medieval mountain village in the center of Italy to share their understanding of spirituality. And at that point, he made very clear that we must do more than just respect and acknowledge another religion's right to exist. We have to realize that that other religion has as much validity as our own. And I think that's the key to interfaith dialogue. Unless you come together on that premise that God speaks to all of us in our own unique and cultural ways, and it has significance for all of us, then we really won't go very far with that. But what about Assisi? St. Francis of Assisi, you may be familiar with him. He's known as the great lover of animals. You see him perched with flowers and with birds on his shoulder and with deer. But he also has a much more important significance for us today, because he lived during the political turmoil of the 13th century, when the Holy Roman Empire was united in a series of crusades that you're all very familiar with against Muslims and Jews. In 1219, he began an amazing journey that directly opposed this culture of war and enmity. Christians looked upon those crusades as holy, and their participation in it as being holy. However, that was a reversal of the beliefs of Christians up until the year 300, when the disciples of Jesus would never participate in a killing. So the Catholic Church and the Holy Roman Empire was very aggressive. And in response, the Sultan of Egypt, Malik al-Kamil, decreed that anyone who brought him the head of a Christian would be rewarded with a Byzantine gold piece. Francis was so opposed to the Crusades, and so that year he went first to the leader of that crusade, I think the 5th Crusade, and begged him not to continue. Of course, the leader denied him. But Francis set out with a friend, and his goal, he went unarmed, his goal was to meet with the Sultan himself, with his friend. And when he got close to the Sultan's camp, the Sultan's army captured them, dragged them, beaten and exhausted before the Sultan. Francis explained that they had been sent not by other men, but by God, and their purpose was to share with the Sultan the truth of the gospel's message. And when the Sultan saw his courage and his enthusiasm, he listened and asked him to stay. And he did stay for quite a long period of time, in which there was this incredible exchange. Days, weeks, I'm not sure. But long enough so that when he finally left, the Sultan showered him with gifts, all of which he refused, with the exception of an ivory horn, which when he got back to his community, he used to call his community to prayer, because he came from a monastic community. And he encouraged his community to practice prostrations, which he learned from his Muslim brothers. And he shared this new respect with his brothers and sisters. And that was the beginning of the breaking of the cycle of the Crusades, the misunderstanding and the enmity that fueled the Crusades. And stories are also told that the Sultan, after his encounter with Francis, several accounts relate that he treated Christian prisoners of war with unprecedented kindness and generosity. So Francis is a great role model for us as Christians, because he lived out that mandate of love one's enemies, to reach out in respect to those of other religions and cultures. And he did this, as we must today, in direct opposition to the political and religious leaders of his day who were sowing enmity, hatred, and misunderstanding. So there are many celebrations that are occurring at the conjoining of all these holidays. And there's a new book that just has come out in June I've only just gotten a copy of it, and I'm only just beginning to examine it. It's called The Tent of Abraham. It is stories of hope and peace for Jews, Christians, and Muslims. And the Tent of Abraham includes not just Abraham, but Hagar and Sarah as well. I'd just like to mention her because now I would like to address especially the women in our group. She and the Reverend Joan Campbell, to whom this book is dedicated, and Joan Campbell is the Director of Religion at the Chautauqua Institute in New York, and also the former Secretary General of the National Council of Churches. They have inspired many women to recognize the important role that they need to play in interreligious dialogue. Women are in a unique position because I think we hold so much in common that it's easy for us to break down barriers. We're open to the heart and to the spirit of our faith. And a powerful area of connectedness for us is through our children. We introduce them early to their spiritual traditions, and we want them to grow up in a world of love and acceptance with a promising future. This is a universal desire of women of all faiths. So the more opportunities that we have to interject our ideas into discussions like this, the more complete and the more convincing these discussions will be. We can also draw nourishment that will feed the seed of inner peace that is present in each of us. And from that will emanate a light that will shine out from each of us as we greet the divine love and compassion. Thank you.
First of all, in Abrahamic religions, the concept of messianism is very important. Messiah is the symbol of hope, peace, and compassion. And we hope our leaders, the leaders of three Abrahamic religions, both politicians as well as the religious leaders, will pay attention to this. So on the auspicious occasion of the anniversary of the 12th Imam, Al-Mahdi Al-Muntazar, our Messiah, the Shia's Messiah, I greet all of the followers of Abrahamic religions, which, considering the kind of time that we are going through and the crisis of humanity that we see today, more so than ever before, we need that kind of guidance, that kind of leader, and that kind of hope. As the title of my talk will show, an interpretation of interfaith dialogue and religious pluralism from a Muslim point of view, not the Islamic point of view. So I want to make this distinction. Second, there is a huge literature produced on this subject. So therefore, I have to limit myself to just glancing at three aspects, a little bit of history of these two concepts, then how a Muslim, which in this case I will try to just give a flavor of Dr. Soroush's Muslim thinker's view of what religious pluralism and interfaith dialogue is. Then a little bit what the Quran says about the people of the book, or Ahl Kitab, or Ahl Zimma, or Zimmis under the Islamic law and Islamic rule. And we have sent down to you the book in truth, confirming the book that existed already before it and protecting it. For each one of you religious communities, we have appointed a law and a way of conduct while the essence of religion is identical. If God had so willed, he would have made all of you one community, but he did not do so, that he may test you in what he has given you. So compete in goodness. To God shall you all return, and he will tell you the truth about what you have been disputing. The Quran, chapter 5, verse 48. There is no compulsion in religion. True guidance has been distinct from error, so whoever rejects false gods and believes in God has grasped the firmest handhold, one that will never break. God is all-hearing and all-knowing. The Quran, chapter 2, verse 256. This is my favorite after Quran. The difference among creatures issues from forms, surat. When one reaches the word of meaning, ma'na, there is peace. O pit of existence, it is as a result of difference in perspective that contention has come about between Muslims, Zoroastrian, and Jews, Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi. The two verses of the Quran and the two verses from the Masnavi captures the spirit of religious pluralism. Religious pluralism also can be defined the recognition of the freedom of faith. This is my favorite. Given those definitions, religious pluralism can be seen in terms of exclusivism, inclusivism, universalism, and pluralism. I only touch upon pluralist perspective. The discourse of religious pluralism in the West is at least a century old, going back to the first Parliament of World Religion convened in 1883 in Chicago. It culminated in the Declaration of Vatican II document in the early 60s. However, in the Muslim world, it is a recent phenomenon. Actually, the reason that is a recent phenomenon because in the Muslim world, unfortunately, we did not have the venue as the Christian and the Jews had in the West. We only were limited to the mosque, and we look at the Ahl Kitab only through the prism of Islamic law, which is very limited. But in the West, they had council of churches, they had Vatican, they had congresses, parliaments, think tanks. So therefore, they were really precursors of religious pluralism and interfaith dialogue. Among the Western scholars, the most influential contemporary participant is John Hick from England, Cantwell Smith, Wilfred Cantwell Smith from Canada, Friedhof Schwann from Switzerland, and Harvey Cox from the United States, and Hans Kung from Germany. As for the Muslim world, the most influential contemporary participants are Muhammad Iqbal from India, Fazlur Rahman from Pakistan, Sayyid Hussein Nasr from Iran, Ismail al-Farrughi from Palestine, Mahmoud Ayyub from Lebanon, Muhammad Arghun from Algeria, Muhammad Talbi from Tunisia, Abdul Aziz Sajidina from Tanzania, Hassan Askari from Pakistan, Muzammal Siddiqui from India, Muhammad Mujtahid Shabistari from Iran, and Abdul Karim Surush from Iran. However, in the broadest sense, we can trace the notion of religious pluralism in its broadest sense in the works of such great classical thinkers as Azizuddin Nasafi, Ibn Arabi, Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi, Ruzbahan Baqli, and Mullah Sadra. As an effort made by a Muslim thinker, I will present a brief summary of Surush's work on religious pluralism, which have been published as a book entitled Sirat-Hay Mustaqim, Straight Paths. The title itself is very provocative. In his plural usage of the Quranic phrase, straight path, Soroush has offered a radical break with both modernist as well as orthodox tradition in Islamic theology. Soroush, in his alternative conceptualization of religious pluralism, draws on his theory of contraction and expansion of religious knowledge. قبض و بسط تئوریک شریعت. In his reformulation of religious pluralism, he adopts critical rationality and epistemological approach. The major distinction of his approach with other Muslim scholars is that while others approach the issue from an intra-religious perspective, as we say in Persian, درون دینی، مباحث درون دینی. He primarily applies extra-religious approach to the concept of religious pluralism. His approach is درون دینی. Another distinction of his view on Islam and religious pluralism is that he believes that Islamic orthodoxy is constricted in dealing with such a modern concept as pluralism. He argues that the Orthodox Muslim scholars approach the issue from a perspective of Sharia, in here means Islamic law. According to Soroush, we cannot derive a theory of religious pluralism from Sharia due to the fact that in Sharia perspective, truth is exclusive to Islam. Therefore, he offers two solutions. First, he considers religious pluralism as an extra-religious category. بحث برون دینی. Second, he believes within the Islamic tradition, the proper source for arriving at a theory of religious pluralism is through the mystical interpretation of Islam, tariqah. In this case, Soroush's approach to religious pluralism is neither exclusivist nor inclusivist. It is a pluralist approach. Moreover, Soroush maintains that pluralism is for thoughtful believer, as we say in Persian, برای دانشمندان، روشنفکران، علما. The debate about pluralism concerns gnostic religiosity, not pragmatic religiosity. از طریق عرفان، فهم عرفانی از دین، نه فهم تقلیدی از دین، عامیانه از دین. Additionally, Soroush argues that religious pluralism primarily is based on two principles. First, plurality of interpretation of religious texts. As we say in Persian, تکثر فهم متون دینی. Second, plurality of interpretation of religious experience, تکثر تجربه دینی. Although religion is eternal, the relativity of religion, religious knowledge, does not entail the relativity of religion itself. In other words, دانش دینی نسبیت داره اما اصل دین مطلق هست. Only al-haq is absolute. Our understanding of religion, our knowledge of religion is definitely relative. So those who accuse him that he's relativizing religion, no, he's relativizing the interpretation of religion, which already is relativized. Consequently, human understanding of religion is a mixture of truth and haq. There is no such a thing as we say, oh, deen man bar haq, Islam nab Muhammadi, the other side is false, this and that. No. In religious pluralism, we do not judge the falsehood or the truth of any religion. That's not the business of religious pluralism. It is in this kind of understanding that makes it possible to accept the religious pluralism and to end the conflict among religions of the world. He further states that acceptance of religious pluralism is the affirmation of the reality of pluralist world. In Farsi we say قبول کردن واقعیت تنوع در هستی، در طبیعت. And not necessarily the truth or falsehood of religion. نه لزوما حالا کی حق کی باطله، هیچ کدوم از اینا بحث نیست. Surush reminds us that pluralism is a result of reaching an impasse on differences, not the similarities. Pluralism arises when we have arrived at the parity of reasoning and when the religious mind has reached an impasse. That's where religious pluralism comes in. Therefore, pluralism comes into play when we have rejected everything that we can possibly reject on the basis of reasoning and evidence. For this, he uses the phrase takafuy adille, sufficiency of reason or exhaustion of rational argument. شیعه و سنی 1400 سال با هم بحث کردن، نه سنی شیعه شد نه شیعه سنی شد. Exhaustion of argument. Okay? تکافوی ادله. Protestant and Catholic, the same thing. All different, the Jewish schools, the same thing. And all religions. In Buddhism, in Hinduism. This is a fact. For this, the use of phrase takafuy adille, sufficiency of reason or exhaustion of the rational discourse, which means different views are equally valid. That's a dangerous zone in religious pluralism. Keep in mind that pluralism does not imply that everything that is said is true. Okay? Ultimately, we have been left with a number of religions of more or less equal standing. Surush's theory of religious pluralism recognizes the reality of plurality and diversity in the world and consider the religious pluralism both in terms of divine relationship and human factor. It does not entail the truth or falsehood of religions and affirms the plurality of the truth. اینجاست که مشکل داریم ما ایرانی‌ها مخصوصاً میگیم. اما مشکل حل میشه به شرطی که بدونیم الحق is the only absolute and every other religion is relative to our understanding, our perception of religion. Finally, diversity in nature and diversity in human society is a fact that has been recognized by the Quran. While we may consider our own religion as the best path toward God and see our salvation through our particular religion, we should not deny our neighbors to have the same experience in their own way. That's the key. However, I believe that compassion, kindness, mercy are at the heart of Abrahamic religions. Therefore, we must learn from classical personalities in our tradition, such as Moses, Maimonides, I hope I pronounced it right, in Judaism, Saint Augustine in Christianity, and my lovely Jalaluddin Rumi in Islam, whose universal, humanist, and mystic teachings transcend history, geography, culture, and civilization. I say this with full passion. In a global village and post 9/11 world, more so than ever, we are in need of religious pluralism and interfaith dialogue to facilitate mutual understanding among faith communities, religious harmony, peaceful coexistence, and eventual world peace. Thank you very much for listening to this.